What is up guys, Morton here from SteamFirst.com with a review for Call of Duty Advanced Warfare Single Player, the first-person shooter developed by Sledgehammer Games and released November 3rd, 2014 on Steam for $60. The single-player campaign of Call of Duty games has always kind of been on the back burner, with multiplayer being the primary focus for the majority of the fanbase, but that doesn't mean that they're bad by any means, and it's clear the developers take the single player quite seriously. The story of Call of Duty Advanced Warfare is actually pretty interesting. It takes place in the year 2055, and you play as Private Jack Mitchell. The game starts in South Korea, and within 10 minutes, your arm gets blown off and your best friend dies, so it certainly starts with a bang. After that, you get discharged from the military and then get hired by a private military corporation called Atlas. They give you a prosthetic arm and an exosuit, and then from there you go on various missions with them. The story goes from South Korea to Detroit to Seattle to just about everywhere in between, as you do a variety of different things to get Atlas more power and trust throughout the world. The story gets a 4.5 out of 5, it's fast-paced, and there's constantly twists and turns throughout the entire game to keep you interested. As with the gameplay, mechanically it's very solid as all Call of Duty games are, but like all Call of Duty games, it feels like you're on a very linear journey just to see certain events. There's a lot of cutscenes and slowly walking around looking at certain things at certain times, so you don't miss any explosions or anything. There's a lot of really cool things, but they all only happen once. For example, there's a sequence where you jump around the tops of cars, and you need to shoot at people while everyone is driving around, but it's something that can only really fit into the game once, and there's a lot of examples of this. It's hard to say if it's good or bad, it's just kind of weird. The constant variety in missions and settings is really cool, and for the most part they're all fun, but at the same time, there's a lot of cutscenes where it'd be a lot more fun to be in control of it, or parts where you want a certain mechanic to be used more but it isn't. Plus, some of the stuff you do seems really forced. Even the example of jumping on cars from earlier, even though it was fun to do, it still seemed like they forced it in there because they thought the regular gun gameplay wasn't interesting anymore. Again, it isn't bad, it just gives a weird unnatural feel to the game. There's also the exosuit, which is the new mechanic in Advanced Warfare. Basically, it adds a couple of extra functions that you can use, but you only get to use certain ones on certain missions. So for example, one mission you might be able to slow down time, but on the next mission that's replaced with the ability to double jump. It doesn't really matter all that much though, because most of the time it's never really necessary to use those things on any of the missions, and when it is required, the game will tell you to do it. The gameplay is pretty fun, and it's constantly changing, so even though it's a first-person shooter at its core, it switches things up throughout the whole game to stop it from getting repetitive. And even though a lot of the mechanics are only used once, it doesn't feel overwhelming having them constantly throwing different types of missions at you. Overall, the gameplay gets a 4 out of 5. It works flawlessly as far as the shooting and all the mechanics go, and the only complaint is how awkward some of the different things feel because they don't really fit in with the rest of the game. Graphically, this game looks amazing. Everything is incredibly realistic looking, and it still manages 60 FPS at almost all times. There's still a bit of a problem telling your squad members from the people you're trying to kill, but since shooting them doesn't really do anything bad, it's not a problem. Everything from the environments to the characters are all super detailed, and just looks amazing. Graphics get a 5 out of 5, there's nothing to complain about at all, the entire game looks fantastic, while also not getting laggy or lowering the frame rate. The audio is also good, but I did notice some problems there. Mainly that the audio would get really quiet sometimes during cutscenes. Sometimes it didn't happen, but other times it did, and there didn't seem to be any reason for it. Other than that, the sound is pretty good, the guns all sound realistic from what I can tell, not that I'm a gun expert, and the voice acting is pretty good throughout the whole game. Sound gets a 4.5 out of 5. Even though I had some problems that I still don't know how to fix, it wasn't game breaking, and the rest of the audio being so good makes up for it. As for replayability, there's actually a fair amount. First off, there's multiple difficulty levels for the game, so if you play through one on lower difficulty, you might want to try again on a harder one. On top of that, there are a ton of achievements to try and get that require you to do different things that you normally wouldn't do on the levels, such as trying to kill 3 people with one sniper shot. Plus, there's intel you can pick up on all the missions, and it's pretty well hidden. Despite the game being fairly linear, they do a great job of putting all the optional intel out of the way so you won't find it without at least putting in some effort. Replayability gets a 3.5 out of 5. Even though the game is fairly linear and it plays the same every time, there are still some things that you can try and do to change it up a bit. Overall, Call of Duty Advanced Warfare has a pretty strong single-player campaign. The story is constantly twisting and turning, and the gameplay is all really fun. Add to that excellent visuals and some really good sound, and you have a really solid game all the way through. It's an okay length too, being about 5 to 6 hours. Call of Duty Advanced Warfare single player gets a 4.5 out of 5. It's a great addition to the franchise, adding quite a few new things while also staying true to what the series is known for.